All right, UPSC aspirants, welcome to your Daily Current Affairs Deep Dive.
Yes.
It is April 11th, 2025,
Yeah.
and this is part one
Part one.
of our analysis.
Right.
We've gone through and compiled a range of different sources today,
Yeah.
and I think we've got some really good stuff.
Quite a lot to unpack.
Yeah, so some of these you might be familiar with already,
Uh-huh.
so consider this, good revision.
Absolutely.
And for those that are new, this is going to be a really good in-depth analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the real goal here is to try and extract just the core insights that are going to be relevant to your preparation without, completely overwhelming you with details.
Yeah, focus is key.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just jump right in.
Let's do it.
And if you find this helpful, as always, please like and subscribe for more in-depth analysis like this.
All right, so kicking things off, let's talk about the Arctic biome.
Okay.
Now, this is up north,
Right.
above the Arctic Circle.
It's huge.
Yeah, it encompasses parts of Canada, Greenland, Iceland, and Eurasia.
And, this is really the definition of extreme climate, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You've got those long winters where temperatures can plunge. We're talking like negative 60 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
And very low precipitation, so very dry.
Yeah, it's a very unique environment.
Now, for those who are studying this for the UPSC exam, what makes this region so important ecologically?
So, historically, the Arctic has acted as a major carbon sink.
Okay.
And that's largely due to the peat and humus in the soil.
So we're talking about that rich, decomposed organic matter.
That's locking away carbon.
Right.
But beyond that, it also plays a vital role in regulating the global climate through a process known as ice albedo feedback.
Okay, I've heard of that.
So imagine ice as a giant mirror reflecting sunlight back into space.
Right.
But as that ice melts and exposes darker ocean water, more heat gets absorbed. And that leads to further melting, creating this amplifying cycle.
A feedback loop.
Exactly.
And I know we've also got huge amounts of methane stored there, too.
That's right. And it's also a vital breeding ground for a whole range of marine life.
So it's really important.
Hugely important.
But here's where things get a little bit concerning.
Yeah.
So the NOAA's 2024 Arctic Report Card is showing a worrying trend.
What's that?
Frequent fires and fossil fuel pollution are actually causing the Arctic tundra to transition from a carbon sink to a carbon source.
So it's releasing carbon now.
Yeah, and this isn't just a projection.
Right.
There was a 2025 study published in Nature Climate Change.
I saw that.
And that focused on a broader area called the Arctic Boreal Zone.
So not just the tundra.
Right. It also includes the coniferous forests and wetlands.
Okay.
And what they found is that over 30% of this entire zone has stopped sequestering carbon and is now actively releasing it.
So a fundamental change in its role.
Exactly.
And what's causing this shift?
Well, the primary driver seems to be the thawing of permafrost.
Right, permafrost, that permanently frozen ground.
Yeah, and the ground is packed with organic material.
And as it thaws?
Well, as global warming increases the topsoil temperatures, that material decomposes and releases carbon dioxide and methane.
Oh, powerful greenhouse gases.
And of course, that kicks off a dangerous feedback loop.
More warming, more thawing, more emissions.
Exactly.
It's a vicious cycle.
It really is. And the scale of the potential risk here is pretty huge.
Yeah.
The Arctic is warming at 3 times the global average rate.
3 times.
Yeah, and we're seeing this really staggering loss of sea ice, about 13% per decade.
That's a lot of ice.
It is. And that not only destabilizes the fragile Arctic ecosystem, but also has a really huge impact on the indigenous communities who live there.
Like the Eskimos.
Yeah, who rely heavily on fishing and hunting for their livelihoods.
Absolutely. And then there's that looming threat of releasing all that carbon trapped within the permafrost.
It's estimated to be around 1,400 gigatons.
A staggering amount.
It is. And if that gets released, it could really accelerate climate change.
No doubt. And we're also seeing increased human activity in the Arctic.
In what way?
Well, there's valuable resources up there. Gold in Alaska, petroleum in the Kenai Peninsula, iron ore in Labrador, and Kiruna in Sweden.
So a lot of resource extraction going on.
Exactly. And that's being facilitated by infrastructure development like railways and Arctic ports.
And of course, we can't forget about icebreakers.
Right. They're making those routes more accessible.
They are, and that's a bit of a concern because it's making the Arctic more vulnerable.
For sure.
Now, India also has a stake in the Arctic.
Oh, really?
We have a research station called Himadri in Svalbard.
What's that focused on?
It's actively engaged in studying the impacts of climate change in the region.
That's important work.
It is. And we also hold observer status in the Arctic Council.
So we have a voice at the table.
We do. It allows us to participate in discussions and collaborations on sustainable development.
It's good to see India taking a proactive role.
And from a governance standpoint, the Svalbard Treaty of 1920 is really a key piece of international law.
What does that cover?
It grants signatory nations non-discriminatory access to resources within the Svalbard archipelago.
Okay.
But it also mandates environmental preservation.
So trying to strike a balance.
Right. And that's a tricky balance to maintain.
For sure.
So for our UPSC aspirants listening in, what's the key takeaway here about the Arctic?
The big one is the reversal of the Arctic's role, from a carbon sink to a carbon source.
It's a huge shift.
It is, and it goes beyond just accelerated warming.
Right.
It fundamentally alters the global carbon budget.
And it's something that we're only beginning to understand the full implications of.
Exactly. And there are significant geopolitical implications, too.
Absolutely, especially around resource access and competition for those resources.
A lot to think about.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about the Rafale-M fighter jets for the Indian Navy.
Oh, yes. This is big news.
This is a major development in terms of bolstering India's maritime security.
A significant investment, too.
It is. We're talking about a 63,000 crore deal with France for the acquisition of 26 Rafale-M fighter jets.
Wow. And when is this deal expected to be finalized?
Well, the signing is expected to happen during the upcoming visit of the French defense minister.
I see.
Now, this deal has some interesting history behind it.
Oh.
You might remember the MMRCA tender from back in 2007.
Vaguely.
That was a huge effort to acquire 126 fighter jets with technology transfer.
Right.
But that ultimately didn't work out.
Okay.
So in 2016, India went with a direct government-to-government deal for 36 Rafale jets for the Indian Air Force.
And those deliveries finished a couple of years ago, right?
Exactly. They were completed between 2019 and 2022.
So this new deal is specifically for the Navy.
Precisely. And it includes 22 single-seater Rafale-M jets, which are compatible with aircraft carrier operations.
Okay.
Plus 4 twin-seater trainer variants, which are not carrier-based.
Right.
And these are all going to operate from India's 2 aircraft carriers, the INS Vikramaditya and the INS Vikrant.
So let's talk about the Rafale-M itself. What kind of aircraft is this?
So it's a 4.5 generation, twin-engine, delta-wing, multi-role fighter aircraft.
Manufactured by?
Dassault Aviation.
Ah, French company.
It's got some impressive specs.
Like?
Well, it can reach speeds up to Mach 1.8 and has a combat radius of over 1,000 kilometers.
That's quite a range.
It is, and it's designed for a variety of missions.
Such as?
Air superiority, ground support, reconnaissance, and even anti-ship warfare.
So a very versatile aircraft.
Extremely versatile.
Now, what about its avionics and systems?
That's where it really shines.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, it's got the RBE-2 Active Electronically Scanned Array Radar, or AKIA radar.
I've heard of those.
They're very advanced. They allow the Rafale to track multiple targets simultaneously with high precision.
Impressive.
And it also has the Spectra electronic warfare suite.
Essential for modern warfare.
Absolutely. It protects against electronic attacks and provides a whole range of electronic countermeasures.
And for situational awareness.
It has front sector optronics for passive detection and tracking.
And to top it all off?
Omnidirectional warning systems.
So it's got all its bases covered.
It does. And for power, it's got 2 Snecmama M88 turbofan engines.
Giving it supercruise capability, I presume?
You get it. That means it can sustain supersonic flight without using afterburners.
Very efficient.
And it's heavily armed, too.
How so?
It has 14 hardpoints.
The carrying weapons and equipment.
Exactly. And it can carry a payload of up to 9,500 kilograms.
That's a lot of firepower.
It is now for those who are interested in the technical variations.
Yes. Let's get into that.
There are actually several different versions of the Rafale.
Okay.
The C variant is the single-seat version for the Air Force.
Right.
The B is a twin-seat combat trainer. And the M, as we've been discussing, is the naval carrier-based version.
With the reinforced landing gear tailhook and foldable wings?
You got it. And then there's the N variant.
What's that for?
That's specifically designed for nuclear strike roles.
Serious stuff.
And then there's the R variant.
I'm guessing that's for research and development.
That's right.
So from India's strategic perspective, what are the main advantages of acquiring the Rafale-M?
Well, it significantly enhances our naval air power projection capabilities.
Which is crucial in the current geopolitical climate.
It is particularly for countering China's growing aircraft carrier fleet in the Indo-Pacific region.
Right.
It's also going to replace our aging MiG-29K aircraft.
A much-needed upgrade.
And importantly, the Rafale-M is capable of nuclear weapons delivery and is equipped with advanced Meteor air-to-air missiles.
Adding to our deterrent capabilities.
Precisely.
Now, we should also address the controversies surrounding this deal.
Of course.
Back in 2023, there were discussions in Parliament about procedural irregularities.
Right, specifically concerning the offset clauses.
Those are the requirements for the vendor to invest a portion of the contract value back into India.
Exactly. And there were also concerns about the high cost?
Which was around 60,000 crore for 26 jets at the time.
Now it's important to highlight the Make in India aspect of this deal.
Yes, tell me more about that.
Dassault has partnered with Reliance to manufacture about 30% of the aircraft's components domestically.
Under the strategic partnership model.
That's right.
So it's not just about acquiring advanced hardware, but also about boosting our domestic defense industry.
Absolutely.
This deal represents a strategic balancing act.
In what way?
Well, it addresses India's immediate need for enhanced naval capabilities,
Right.
while simultaneously promoting self-reliance in defense manufacturing through initiatives like the strategic partnership model.
It's a dual approach.
And a necessary one.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on. Let's dive into a sector that's crucial for modern technology and our transition to clean energy.
Sounds interesting.
It's India's National Critical Mineral Mission, or NCMM for short.
NCMM.
Which was launched in 2025.
And what's the main objective of this mission?
The primary goal is to reduce India's dependence on imports for critical minerals.
Which are?
These are minerals that are essential for a whole range of modern technologies, but their supply chains are often vulnerable.
Due to limited availability or geographical concentration.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that the definition of critical can change over time.
Based on technological advancements and supply and demand.
Exactly. So what kind of applications are we talking about here?
Well, things solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles, energy storage.
Right.
And it goes beyond that too. Electronics, defense, aerospace, even medical technologies.
So a really broad spectrum.
Absolutely.
Now, to give this mission a clear legal and regulatory framework back in 2022, a committee under the Ministry of Mines identified 30 critical minerals.
And what were some of the key minerals on that list?
Well, it included elements like antimony, beryllium, lithium, and various rare earth elements.
Okay.
And then 24 of these minerals were incorporated into the MMDR Act.
The Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act.
That's the one, and that gave the central government exclusive authority to auction those minerals.
And to ensure that this list stays relevant and up to date, they're setting up a Center of Excellence for Critical Minerals.
The CEC.
To provide policy recommendations.
Exactly. Now when it comes to the actual work on the ground.
Yeah, who are the key players?
The Geological Survey of India, or GSI, is playing a major role in exploration.
Looking for new deposits.
Exactly. And the Department of Atomic Energy has identified substantial reserves of rare earth elements in Rajasthan.
Interesting.
And Iral India Limited is involved in processing beach sand minerals and extracting rare earth elements.
So we have a number of organizations working on this.
We do, and international collaboration is also really important in this area.
Makes sense.
Khanij Bidesh India Ltd, or KABIL, has been actively pursuing agreements with other countries.
For example?
Well, they've signed agreements with Argentina for lithium exploration. And with Australia for lithium and cobalt projects.
So securing access to those resources.
Exactly. And these agreements typically involve offtake agreements, financial investments, and coordination through the Ministry of External Affairs.
And globally, who are the top producers of these critical minerals?
So the major players include Chile, Indonesia, the Democratic Republic of Congo,
DRC,
China, Australia, and South Africa.
So a mix of countries?
It is now coming back to the NCMM. The key objectives are pretty straightforward.
What are they?
To ensure long-term availability, security, and domestic processing of these critical minerals.
Which is essential for a whole range of reasons.
It's crucial for India's clean energy transition, for economic development, and for national security.
And it aligns with India's broader climate goals too, right?
Absolutely. It supports our targets of achieving net zero emissions by 2070 and reducing emissions intensity by 45% by 2030.
So a very important mission.
It is now. Why is this so strategically important for India?
Well, we have a very high import dependence for many of these minerals.
Over 80% for some of them.
Which creates a significant vulnerability.
It does. If there are supply disruptions, it could impact our renewable energy targets, which are 500 gigawatts of installed capacity by 2030.
Ambitious targets.
They are. And it could also affect our semiconductor manufacturing ambitions.
Which is a key focus area for the government.
It is. So the work that KABIL is doing in acquiring overseas mining assets like the Maricunga project in Argentina, and forging partnerships with countries like Australia.
Under the Mineral Security Partnership.
Right. That's all really important.
Absolutely. It's about securing our future.
Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about healthcare.
Right.
There's been a really positive development in the area of sickle cell disease screening.
That's good to hear.
Scientists at the Raman Research Institute, or RRI, have developed a very affordable electrofluidic device.
And what does this device do?
It's designed for preliminary screening of sickle cell disease, or SCD.
Which is?
A genetic blood disorder that affects red blood cells.
So let's break this down a bit for our listeners.
Okay.
What exactly is sickle cell disease?
Well, it's the most common inherited blood disorder.
And it specifically affects the red blood cells.
Right now, inside our red blood cells, we have a protein called hemoglobin.
Which carries oxygen throughout the body.
Exactly. And in people with SCD, they have an abnormal type of hemoglobin called hemoglobin S.
And what does that do?
Well, it causes the red blood cells, which are normally round and flexible,
Right, like little discs.
to become rigid and take on a sickle or crescent shape.
Hence the name sickle cell disease.
Precisely. Now, those sickled red blood cells don't move through the small blood vessels as easily.
Because they're not as flexible.
Exactly. And this can lead to blockages in blood flow.
Causing all sorts of problems.
It can cause severe pain, infections, and even organ damage.
And because these cells are abnormal, they have a shorter lifespan.
Right, so that leads to chronic anemia.
So what causes this condition?
It's all down to genetics.
Okay.
There's a specific gene that's responsible for producing hemoglobin.
Hmm.
And if a person inherits 2 copies of the sickle cell gene, one from each parent, they develop SCD.
What if they only inherit 1 copy?
That's called sickle cell trait.
And are those individuals healthy?
They generally are, but they can still pass the gene on to their children.
Okay, so what are the symptoms of sickle cell disease?
Well, they can vary depending on the severity.
But some common ones.
In early childhood, you might see tiredness, swelling in the hands and feet, and jaundice.
Jaundice is the yellowing of the skin and eyes.
Exactly. And as the disease progresses, you can see more serious complications.
Like what?
Recurrent episodes of very intense pain, worsening anemia, organ damage, particularly to the spleen, lungs, kidneys, and brain.
And a higher risk of infections.
Exactly.
So how is sickle cell disease treated?
Currently, the only cure is a bone marrow transplant.
Which is a major procedure.
It is, but there are other treatments available that can help manage the symptoms, reduce complications, and prolong life.
So improving quality of life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of research going on in gene therapy.
Which holds promise for a more definitive cure.
Absolutely. In fact, the UK recently became the first country to approve a gene therapy treatment for SCD.
That's a big step forward.
It is. So coming back to the device developed by RII scientists, having this more affordable preliminary screening tool is really significant.
Especially in areas where SCD is more prevalent.
Exactly. Early detection and intervention can make a huge difference.
It can save lives.
It can. And this highlights the importance of access to healthcare.
Absolutely. Everyone deserves quality and affordable healthcare.
Okay, let's shift gears now and move from the microscopic world of blood cells to something much bigger.
I'm intrigued.
The universe.
Wow.
And more specifically, a phenomenon called CP violation in baryons.
I've heard whispers of this in the physics world.
The LHCb experiment at CERN has announced confirmed evidence of CP violation in baryons.
Now hold on, let's break that down a bit.
Okay.
For those of us who aren't particle physicists, what is CP violation?
Well, to understand that, we need to start with matter and antimatter.
Okay.
Matter is everything we see and interact with. It has mass and occupies space.
Right.
It's made up of atoms and molecules.
Okay.
And we normally encounter it in its various states: solid, liquid, gas, and plasma.
So what about antimatter?
Antimatter is essentially a mirror image of matter.
What do you mean?
Well, every particle of matter has an antimatter counterpart that's almost identical.
Almost.
The key difference is that they have the opposite electric charge.
So, for example?
The antimatter counterpart of an electron is a positron.
Interesting.
Now, according to the Big Bang Theory, matter and antimatter should have been created in equal amounts at the beginning of the universe.
Right.
But when matter and antimatter meet, they annihilate each other, releasing energy.
So why didn't the universe just disappear in a burst of energy?
That's one of the big mysteries in physics.
Okay.
And this is where CP violation comes in.
All right, tell me more.
CP symmetry is a fundamental concept in physics.
What does it say?
It says that the laws of physics should remain the same even if we swap a particle with its antiparticle.
Okay.
And simultaneously reverse the spatial coordinates, kind of like creating a mirror image.
So a double swap.
Exactly. But CP violation means that the symmetry isn't perfect.
So there's a slight difference in how matter and antimatter behave.
Exactly. And this difference might be why we have a universe dominated by matter.
Fascinating.
It is. Now, let's talk about baryons.
What are those?
They're a type of subatomic particle made up of 3 quarks.
Quarks? Are those even tinier particles?
Right. And the most common baryons are protons and neutrons, which make up the nuclei of atoms.
And antibaryons are their antimatter counterparts.
Precisely. Now, the LHCb experiment was studying a specific baryon called the lambda B.
What's special about that one?
Well, they observed its decay process.
How it breaks down into other particles?
Right, and they found a tiny but statistically significant difference in the decay rate between the lambda B and its antibaryon.
Meaning?
This is the first time CP violation has been confirmed in baryons with such a high level of certainty.
So a major discovery.
It is, and it has huge implications.
Like what?
Well, it adds to the puzzle of the matter-antimatter asymmetry.
And it challenges our current understanding of particle physics.
Exactly. Our standard model might need some tweaking.
Now, all this talk about antimatter might seem very theoretical. Right.
But it does have some practical application.
For example, PET scans use positrons, which are anti-electrons.
For medical imaging.
Exactly. But producing antimatter is incredibly difficult and expensive.
How much can we produce?
CERN only produces tiny amounts on the order of nanograms each year.
And that's for research.
Right.
So for the UPSC exam, understanding these fundamental symmetries of nature and the implications of their violation is really important.
It's about grasping the fundamental building blocks of our universe.
Okay, let's bring it back down to Earth.
All right.
What's next on the agenda?
We've got some news from the Indian defense sector.
Okay.
India has offered its indigenously developed Akash Surface-to-Air Missile system.
To whom?
To the United Arab Emirates.
That's a significant development.
It is. It shows India's growing capabilities in defense manufacturing and our increasing role as a potential arms exporter.
So tell me more about the Akash missile system.
Well, it's a short-range surface-to-air missile system, or SAM for short.
And it's designed to protect vulnerable areas from air attacks.
Who developed it?
It was a completely indigenous project by the DRDO.
India's Defense Research and Development Organization?
Exactly, and it's currently being produced by Bharat Dynamics Ltd. In Hyderabad.
And when was it inducted into the Indian Armed Forces?
The Air Force got it in 2014 and the Army in 2015.
Okay.
And in 2022, Armenia became the first foreign buyer.
So there's definitely international interest?
There is.
What are some of the key features of the Akash missile?
Well, it's about 5.8 meters long, has a diameter of 350 millimeters, and a wingspan of around 1.1 meters.
Okay.
It has a range of 4.5 to 25 kilometers and can engage targets at altitudes from 100 meters to 20 kilometers.
Quite versatile.
It is, and it uses a command guidance system to intercept a variety of targets.
Like what?
Helicopters, fighter aircraft, UAVs, you name it.
Impressive.
And one of the really important features is that it can engage multiple targets simultaneously.
So it can handle a saturation attack.
Exactly. It can operate in a coordinated group mode or autonomously.
And what about electronic countermeasures?
It's got built-in ECCM, which gives it high jamming immunity.
Very important in modern warfare.
It is. And the whole system is mobile.
Meaning?
It's mounted on vehicles, so it can be deployed quickly and easily.
Very flexible.
And it has an open system architecture, so it can be integrated with other air defense networks.
So a very capable system.
It is now the heart of the Akash system is its Rajendra Phased Array Radar.
Tell me more about that.
It's a 3D piece of radar.
Passive electronically scanned array.
Exactly. And it can electronically scan the airspace track targets and guide multiple missiles simultaneously.
So it's the brains of the operation.
It really is. And it provides real-time information on range, azimuth, and height.
This offer to the UAE really showcases India's progress in defense manufacturing.
It does. It's a sign that we're moving from being a major importer to a potential exporter.
A significant shift.
Okay, let's jump to the world of finance now.
All right.
There's been some news from the U.S. stock market.
What's happening?
The S&P 500 briefly entered bear market territory.
Bear market. That sounds ominous.
It can be.
What does it mean exactly?
Well, a bear market is basically a prolonged period of declining stock prices.
How much of a decline?
Generally 20% or more from a recent peak.
And what are the typical signs of a bear market?
You tend to see a lot of investor pessimism.
People are worried about the economy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that leads to large-scale selling of investments.
And often a weakening economy as well.
Now, you might also come across the term bear investor.
What's that?
That's someone who anticipates that prices will go down and might even try to profit from that decline.
How so?
Well, they might sell borrowed securities hoping to buy them back later at a lower price.
So a risky strategy.
It can be, and it's important to note that the concept of a bear market can apply to both broad market indices like the S&P 500 and also to individual stocks or commodities.
So any asset can experience a bear market.
Right. As long as there's a significant and sustained price decrease, typically over a period of 2 months or more.
And as you mentioned earlier, bear markets are often associated with recessions.
Right. They're the opposite of bull markets, which are characterized by rising prices.
So historically, have there been any major bear markets?
Well, one of the most significant was during the Great Depression in the U.S.
After the stock market crash of 1929.
That's right. It lasted for several years.
So this recent dip in the S&P 500 is a reminder that markets are cyclical.
Exactly what goes up must come down.
And understanding these cycles and the various indicators of economic health is important.
It is, even if you're not an economist.
Agreed. These trends can have a ripple effect across many sectors.
Let's shift gears again and talk about something a little different.
Okay.
Agriculture and horticulture.
Interesting.
There's some good news coming out of Tamil Nadu.
What's that?
The Tiruvallur district is making progress in cultivating Adenium obesum.
Which is also known as the desert rose.
Exactly.
Now, what's special about this plant?
Well, it's a succulent shrub.
Meaning it stores water in its stems and leaves.
Exactly. And it's native to desert and dry shrubland areas.
Where's specific?
Primarily Africa and the Arabian Peninsula.
Okay.
But it's gained popularity as a houseplant and in bonsai.
Because of its beautiful flowers.
Exactly. They're trumpet-shaped and come in a variety of colors.
From white to deep red.
And they're often fragrant.
Nice.
And it has a unique swollen trunk.
Which gives it that distinctive look.
And that trunk is also how it stores water.
So it's very drought tolerant.
It is, but it is a slow grower.
How slow?
It typically only grows about 12 inches per year.
So patience is key.
It is. But this successful cultivation in Tamil Nadu is really interesting.
Why?
Well, it shows the potential for agricultural diversification.
Moving beyond traditional crops.
Exactly. And ornamental horticulture can be a good source of income for farmers.
And the desert rose seems well suited to the climate in that region.
It is.
Okay, one last topic for today.
All right, what have you got?
The Thar Desert.
Oh, interesting.
There's been a study showing that it's been greening over the past 2 decades.
Greening.
Yes, the vegetation cover has increased by about 38% annually.
That's a huge change.
It is, and they're attributing it to 2 main factors.
Sure.
Increased monsoon rainfall and agricultural expansion.
Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar with the Thar Desert,
right,
it's a large, arid region in northwestern India.
Also known as the Great Indian Desert.
Exactly, and it's mainly in Rajasthan, but it extends into parts of Haryana, Punjab, and Gujarat.
And even across the border into Pakistan.
It's actually the 9th largest subtropical desert in the world.
Wow.
And it covers about